Good afternoon, and thanks all for attending the Day Ahead Market Enhancements Initiative meeting to discuss the second revised straw proposal that was posted on July 21st. This is Christina Osborne from ISO Stakeholder Affairs. I'm going to be facilitating the meeting. Go over the agenda. James Friedrich, who is the policy lead assigned to this initiative, will be presenting. He will start by providing an overview, and then he'll go into the details of the proposed design changes. In the top right of the screen, you'll see a list of panelists. These are also members of the ISO who have been actively involved in this initiative, who are available to respond to questions. I won't read through their names, but they are here to provide support for the meeting. This slide depicts the ISO stakeholder process, and so the next step, as you can see in the process, is the draft final proposal phase. I'm going to go over the schedule and the next steps at the end of the presentation. And just some reminders, we are recording this meeting for informational and convenience purposes. We will post that recording out on the initiative webpage once it's available. And just as a reminder, any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. These calls are structured to stimulate an honest and open dialogue and engage different perspectives. We just ask that you please keep your comments professional and respectful, and also try and be brief and refrain from repeating what has already been said just so that we can manage time more efficiently. So Event Services has updated their WebEx application. So as you may have noticed when you joined, you could either call from your computer or have the computer call you. So as a result, there are new instructions for how to raise your hand. So if you did join the audio from your computer or have it, or use the call me option, you'll need to select the raise hand icon located above the chat window on the bottom right corner of the screen. It's very small, but if you look at the chat box up to the right-hand side, you'll see a hand icon. So that's if you joined through audio through your computer. If you just dialed in, you can go ahead and press pound to raise your hand. That does not work if you joined via WebEx, but we'll remind you when we do stop for questions throughout. If you do need any technical assistance, if you're having trouble getting into the queue, please reach out to Adam, the event producer. Also, just a reminder to state your name and affiliation before asking your question, or if you want to send your question via the chat, you're welcome to send it directly to me, and I'll read that out loud to the group. So we do have another meeting scheduled for tomorrow. It's kind of an overflow meeting. It's the same presentation. If we do get through the entire presentation today, we'll go ahead and cancel that meeting if it's not needed. So I just want to give you a heads up on that. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to James Friedrich.
Today I'll be walking us through the discussion on our latest proposal for the Day Ahead Market Enhancements Initiative. And I'll start today with a very high-level overview of the proposed Day Ahead Market design and a summary of changes we made from the previous straw proposal. And then we can pause for some general questions before getting into some of the more nitty-gritty details later in the presentation. So next slide, please. So to start, we've communicated this already, but we are moving forward with a continuation of the sequential IFM and RUC approach as we do today for the Day Ahead Market Enhancements. A sequential approach, we believe, can still address the factors that originally motivated the CAISO and stakeholders to reconsider the current Day Ahead Market design. System operators today continue to systematically increase the net load forecast used in the RUC process. This is to commit additional resources to help address net load uncertainty and to provide additional real-time ramp capability. These systematic out-of-market actions indicate that market design changes are needed. The issue is the Day Ahead Market currently lacks a product that provides capacity to help address net load uncertainty and provide additional real-time ramp capability. And that's where imbalance reserves come in. Imbalance reserves should decrease the need for system operators to adjust the RUC load forecast, which has the added benefit of making IFM schedules more consistent with what comes out of RUC. But there are still enhancements that we propose to make to the current residual unit commitment process. These enhancements include the ability to procure reliability capacity in the downward direction, not just the upward direction, to continue to use the RUC process to establish the export and import energy schedules to be tagged for checkout, and also to establish the binding configuration for multi-stage generating resources. Next slide, please. So I'll walk through some of the basics. IFM will continue to clear bid and supply and bid and demand with the addition of an imbalance reserve product. As you can see in this picture, imbalance reserves will be procured to cover the upward and downward uncertainty requirements that are set in the market run based on historical uncertainty. So the edge of the green box depicts where the IFM clears in this picture. The blue box represents additional capacity procured as imbalance reserves up, and the red arrow depicts the downward capability procured within the cleared IFM schedule. Next slide. So whenever the physical supply cleared on non-variable energy resources is different from the CAISO's net load forecast, the RUC process will clear either additional upward or downward headroom that we're calling reliability capacity up or reliability capacity down. The need for reliability capacity up and down is driven by three major factors. First is how bid and load clears the market relative to the CAISO load forecast. The second is how virtual bids clear, whether we have net virtual supply or net virtual demand. And third is how VERS clear, variable energy resources clear, relative to the CAISO's variable energy resource forecast. Next slide. So this slide illustrates procurement of reliability capacity up in RUC. You can see that in the left-hand side, we will, in the IFM run, we will clear the imbalance reserves up and down relative to where the IFM clears. And then sequentially in RUC, we will procure reliability capacity up, which is to get the cleared non-VER physical supply up to the CAISO net load forecast represented by that purple box. Next slide, please. So this slide is basically the same concept, except opposite, when RUC will procure reliability capacity down when the CAISO net load forecast is less than the cleared non-VER physical supply in IFM. Next slide. So this chart helps depict the real-time bidding obligations from these various products. Resources that receive reliability capacity or imbalance reserve awards must economically bid the full range of their awards in the real-time market. These economic bids give the real-time market more flexibility by allowing it to redispatch resources to meet imbalances that might occur between the market runs. Resources won't be required to bid up to their PMAX as shown in this picture, but can choose to do so. Any portion of the resources schedule below the portion covered by imbalance reserves down and reliability capacity down, which is that light blue line, can be self-scheduled if the resource chooses to do that, or it can be economically bid. Any resource with a day-ahead energy schedule or imbalance reserve or reliability capacity award effectively has a real-time must-offer obligation. This does not replace the existing must-offer obligation paradigm for RA resources, which we'll get to when we talk about the proposed transition period near the end of the slides. But that is something we will be evaluating, whether this market design gets us to a place where we can comfortably eliminate the RA real-time must-offer obligation. Next slide, please. So these tables represent a summary of some of the changes that we've made since the latest straw proposal. After these sets of tables, I will pause for any general questions. So first, As I mentioned, the previous proposal, we had an integrated IFM and REC process that consisted of multiple passes and a decoupled reliability capacity constraint to try to decouple the price of reliability, capacity, and energy. We are now proposing a sequential IFM and REC process as we have today. The reason being that when we tested the multi-pass formulation, it revealed some insurmountable technical issues, and also partly based on stakeholder feedback for the co-optimized approach. A new component of the day-ahead market formulation is an additional market power mitigation path that is run before the REC process. So in the previous proposal, we had proposed that the existing market power mitigation paths would be responsible for mitigating energy, imbalance reserves, and reliability capacity offers whenever the base scenario or the deployment scenarios were binding. Now we are separating the market power mitigation, proposing to separate the market power mitigation passes such that there'll be a market power mitigation pass run before REC that will be used specifically to mitigate reliability capacity offers. And the reason we're proposing this is because, we find that the status quo market power mitigation path, or using the status quo market power mitigation path to mitigate reliability capacity would not be as optimal as utilizing the REC optimization to determine whether reliability capacity offers are uncompetitive. We have made some changes to variable energy resources and which products, new products that they're eligible for. Previously, we proposed that variable energy resources were ineligible to provide reliability capacity up and imbalance reserves up. And now we are proposing that if they choose to use the CAISO VER forecast to set their upper economic limit, they can provide either of the upward capacity products. And this is in response to stakeholders desiring the ability to allow VERs to provide these products. Next slide. And again, with all of these, I'm just doing a summary of these changes. With all of these, we'll go into more detail in the slides upcoming. So for imbalance reserve procurement, the previous proposal is that we would procure imbalance reserves based on a demand curve. The new proposal is to procure the entire imbalance reserve requirement and set a relaxation penalty price below the power balance constraint in IFM, but above low priority self-scheduled exports. The reason being is that using a demand curve may cause low priority self-scheduled exports or exports with high economic bids to clear before meeting the full imbalance reserve requirement, leaving the CAISO short of the ramping capability and the capacity needed for uncertainty, which may then cause operators to continue to take the out-of-market actions that the imbalance reserves are intended to prevent. For imbalance reserve settlement, we talked about this at the latest, I think it was in May, the Market Surveillance Committee meeting, but we are proposing a deviation settlement for RAMP that is a combination of forecasted movement in imbalance reserve awards in the day-ahead market and forecasted movement in flexible ramping product uncertainty awards in the real-time market. And this is to prevent double payments of forecasted movement, energy opportunity costs, and provides additional incentives to follow the day-ahead schedule. Next slide, please. We have added to the proposal a more punitive imbalance reserve no-pay mechanism in which if the resource doesn't provide the required bids in the real-time market, they'll be charged. They won't just we won't just take back the imbalance reserve up award, we would charge the higher of the set of real-time market FRU prices for the imbalance reserve award. And stakeholders commented that we needed a stronger incentive than a simple no pay to ensure that resources follow through on their must offer obligations. Next is accounting for energy offer cost and upward capacity procurement. This was a new design proposal we introduced in our last proposal, in which we proposed to implement a real-time energy offer cap for resources that were awarded reliability capacity up or imbalance reserves up. The offer cap would have had the effect of incentivizing resources to increase their capacity bids so that they can distinguish themselves in the RUC optimization as being having higher energy costs. In our new proposal, we are going forward with an approach that's more simple and direct, in which resources would be ineligible to receive reliability capacity or imbalance reserves up on any capacity segment that exceeds a calculated price that the CAISO calculates and publishes prior to the day-ahead market. Stakeholders felt that the previous proposal was too complicated, and so the new proposal solves, we think, the same objective, just more directly and simply. Next slide. And I believe this is the last slide before I'll pause for some general questions. So with MarketPower Mitigation, in the previous proposal, we had, for the capacity products, had proposed to mitigate the capacity products to a maximum of $30, or $30 plus the resources default energy bid minus the real-time energy offer cap. We got rid of the real-time energy offer cap in this proposal. The $30 represented the 90th percentile spin price, which represents a competitive availability price. Today, we are offering we will have an additional competitive availability price for imbalance reserves that excludes the non-competitive congestion prices, similar to how we calculate the competitive locational marginal price used in energy offer mitigation. I just want to note that in this slide, I used the term competitive availability price. In the proposal, we use the term competitive capacity price, but I think going forward, we're going to use the term competitive availability price, so I don't want that to cause any confusion. And stakeholders felt like the $30 sort of default availability bid used for capacity mitigation might be too high. And so we published in the proposal a set of prices, offer prices and bid prices at various percentiles for spinning reserves, and are seeking stakeholder feedback about which level they feel most or best represents their costs. And lastly, the proposal eliminates mention of corrective capacity up and corrective capacity down as biddable products. These have been removed from implementation based on some FERC agreements. So, like I said, everything will be covered in more detail later in the slides, but I will stop there to see if there's any general questions or comments.
Okay, Adam, can you remind people how to ask a question? And we are going to go into more detail in future slides, so if you can hold up on any, any questions related to these items when we go over them in the next section, that would be great.
All right, and just a reminder to everyone, you can raise your hand in WebEx by using the raise hand icon that is located in the top right-hand corner of the WebEx chat feature. And if you are dialed into the phone only, you can press #2 on your telephone keypad. All right, and we do have several callers in the queue.
Okay,
Caller, your line is being unmuted. Please go ahead.
And just a reminder to unmute.
Personal device off mute.
Hello. I think I am. Can you hear me?
Alva, is that you? You're choppy, breaking up there.
I'm on the phone.
There you go.
Can you? Okay, good. Sorry about that. I didn't hear the usual double beep, so I wasn't sure that I was connected. Sorry. This is Salvis Svoboda from PG&E. Just a quick question going, and I know you will clarify, but on the previous slide, I think page 15, the accounting for the energy offer cost. One thing we were a little confused about was whether there would be, it seems like the way it's expressed here, it's possible to bid below the 97.5 price day ahead, but then to at will escalate that price in real time. Can you, which is different from what the purpose of the previous proposal was. So just wanted to know if that's actually correct, and you can go into more detail later if you like.
So are you getting at whether we would change the P97.5 price in real time based on real time conditions? Is that what the question is?
No. Would there be a cap on the real time energy bid associated with the imbalance product in real time?
Got it. Yeah, so the new proposal doesn't propose an energy cap, a real-time energy cap as the old proposal did. Instead, what the new proposal does is if in the day-ahead market, we set an established price, if there is a resource provides a capacity segment for energy with an associated bid price that exceeds the CAISO's calculated price, that capacity segment would the capacity on that segment would be ineligible to receive imbalance reserve up or reliability capacity up awards.
Okay, that's clear. I'd like to ask later whether that actually is going to be a rule that incents any kind of truthful revelation, but we'll talk about that later. Thank you.
Sure, thanks.
All right, moving to the next caller in the queue. Caller, your line is being unmuted. Please go ahead.
Just a reminder to unmute yourself. Sorry, guys, they did some updates to the system.
Sorry, give me one moment. It looks like we're having an audio problem with that. Let me just resolve that real quick. All right, I think it might be best if we move on from this and come back to those questions later while we resolve this issue for the smaller number of phone callers who are just on the phone.
So there's some people having audio trouble?
Yes. For primarily the call-in users who are just there are 15 or so as compared to the 130 on WebEx. We're going to resolve this real quick, though. But it might take like 2 minutes.
So are you saying, is there anybody else in the queue, or should we just kind of move on and then go back the queue later? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes, that is what I'm suggesting. They're on the phone. And yeah, we need to resolve this audio issue pertaining to them only. And they could also feel free to ask their question via the chat. But we'll have this taken care of in just a second.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Why don't we go ahead, James? Then, if people have questions, we can always go back and answer questions if they pertain to the overview slides, but go ahead.
I am seeing someone else in the WebEx queue. If we'd like to take more questions.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, go ahead.
Alrighty, caller, your line's being unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yep, go ahead, Dan.
Okay, thanks. Brave new world here, working with technology. So I guess I was just saying, James, thank you for the presentation and for making the effort to give a nice high-level overview of where this is headed now. And I guess the question I had was just kind of very, very high level as well, and maybe for you or maybe more for Greg or Brad if they're on. And that's just whether the CAISO sort of thought about sort of how this framework under the DAME meshes with what was discussed at the energy storage enhancements meeting earlier this week, or just kind of in general, sort of whether this design is driving us towards a market that will work when we're kind of more dominated by zero marginal cost resources. And just kind of, it was interesting just to not see much discussion of sort of storage resources and that sort of thing in the revised straw proposal. So just any thoughts on that at a high level?
Yeah, this is James. I would ask if Greg has any thoughts.
Yeah, this is Greg. Yeah, we have been thinking about that, and I think part of that is, and you'll see in this proposal, I mean, we do provide the opportunity for the VERS to provide these new capacity products, but also I think we're taking into account of this as we're thinking about our designs going forward, looking at how this will all work together. This is what we're really trying to address here, again, is that, initial problem where we're having this uncertainty between day ahead and real time. I do think that, that is a place where the storage resources can come into play as well. I wouldn't really characterize storage resources as zero marginal cost resources, though. I think, as we've learned, there are, several costs that they have to account for there, not only the opportunity costs, the cycling costs, energy costs, all those types of issues. So, it is something that we're going to have to, continue to keep our eye on going forward, but, we will, continue to look at that as we move on. But
yeah,
I don't have a great answer for you now because, we're still looking at how we're going to, what design we're ultimately going to come up with through that storage market design enhancements. But, clearly we'll keep in mind what the enhancements we're working on here, and if, given that if this design needs to change to help, align with what we end up with there, we obviously move forward and do that as well.
Great, thanks for that, Greg. And the zero marginal cost just kind of used colloquially there, but I think you knew what I was getting after. And I guess just kind of when we do drill down into some of the details, some of the things like, depending on how the changes with like the minimum state of charge tool and stuff develop, it just maybe good to try and continue to crosswalk those between the other work being done and sort of how it would play out within this implementation, even though the timelines for implementation are a little bit different. But I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that, Dan.
All right, we do not have any additional callers in the queue at this time.
Okay, were you able to resolve the audio issues, or are you still working on them?
I'm still working on it, but we should have it taken care of soon. Everyone can hear us.
Everybody can hear us. Okay. Yes. Okay, why don't you go ahead? Yeah.
I should quickly just address two quick questions in the chat, if that's okay, before we move on.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
should I read them aloud?
I can do that. Hold on a second. I know that we did have one, and sorry, everybody, this is kind of a new system here. So Mike Castellano, CPC. So are you going to make debts for reliability capacity? Mike's question.
Yeah, sort of. We're calling them, we'll be calling them default availability bids. And it, as of right now, would be the same for reliability capacity as it is for imbalance reserves, and is also proposed to be a single quantity, not some sort of, frequently calculated price. So, in the last proposal, we proposed it to be $30 flat. And so, in this iteration of the proposal, we're looking for some feedback on what may be a better, what price may better represent the default availability price of resources.
That answers your question, Mike. Feel free to send another one in the chat if you want. And then the other question is on slide 12. It's from Dave Francis regarding the real-time bidding obligations. Do these bidding obligations imply that CAISO may decommit units in real time since bid range is shown below PMIN to presumably 0 megawatts? Let me know if you need me to reread that.
It may, it may be that, I don't know the direct answer to that. It may be that this lower bracket here for sorry, I got to expand my window. Real-time self-schedules or economic bids, maybe should stop at the red PMIN line.
Yeah, no, hey, James, this is Brad Cooper. I think what we're trying to represent there is that's showing the minimum load portion of the bid. I believe, and we can get to that section, but I believe our rule is that the RUC, correct me if I'm wrong, would not decommit entire resources, but it would just decommit MSG configuration. So only. Is that right, James?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think what we're just trying to show here is that's the minimum load portion of the bid, which could be an economic bid or a self-schedule in real time.
Thanks, Brad.
And one more in the chat from Mohan Narula. Will day-ahead self-schedule for energy be required to have economic bids in the real-time market?
Not if they don't receive an imbalance reserve award or a reliability capacity award.
Okay. Anybody with their hand raised? And that's the only chat question.
We do not have any questions in the queue at this time.
Okay, so next we'll go into some more detail on the various design elements. So this slide here gives us the general agenda for this section of the presentation. After each of these subsections, I'll stop for questions for the topics within them. So next slide, please. And one more. So you can see in the legend in the bottom, I'll go in sort of sequential order of the market runs. So we'll start with market power mitigation for the ISM. Like today, the market power mitigation pass will clear the market using unmitigated bids to establish if there are any uncompetitive binding transmission constraints. Any resource with a net positive marginal congestion contribution to an uncompetitive constraint will have their bids mitigated as an input to the IFM. Market power mitigation for IFM will need to be updated to accommodate the addition of imbalance reserves. Particularly, the market power mitigation paths will utilize the upward and downward deployment scenarios that are used in the IFM to evaluate competitiveness of energy flows at the upward and downward uncertainty requirements. Imbalance reserve offers will be mitigated only in the case of uncompetitive binding constraints in the upward and downward deployment scenarios. On the other hand, since energy prices have congestion contributions to binding constraints in all the scenarios, including the base scenario, energy bids will be mitigated in any of the scenarios. The mitigation prices used for energy are the same as today, using the greater of the default energy bid or the competitive energy price. However, in response to stakeholder feedback, we have expanded the option for mitigation prices used for imbalance reserves to include a competitive capacity price. And we have a slide later with more detail on this. So this is the only slide for MarketPower mitigation. I guess I'll just pause to see if anybody has any specific questions for this pass.
All right, and I do see a question on the line. Caller, your line is being unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, this is Callie Wells with WPTF. I just have a quick question on this. I just want to make sure I understood what you just kind of walked us through. So energy offers can be mitigated if they have a competitive or an uncompetitive congestion component in either the base case, the deployment in the upward direction, or the deployment in the downward direction. Is that correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But, okay, thanks. So then, but the imbalance reserve offers will only be mitigated if they have an uncompetitive congestion component in the deployment scenarios.
Correct.
Okay, so okay, I have to think of that one, but thanks for clarifying that one. I just want to make sure I understood.
Sure, thank you.
Have anybody else in the queue?
We do not have any additional callers in the queue at this time.
And I don't see any in the chat.
Okay. So we'll move on to the integrated forward market. So the IFM will obtain a market solution using any mitigated bids from the previous MarketPower mitigation path. The IFM will clear bid and load against bid and supply like it does today, co-optimized with meeting the ancillary service requirement and the imbalance reserve requirement. The imbalance reserve requirement will be determined using statistical regression to estimate the 97.5 and 2.5 percentile level of uncertainty based on historical data, which is modeled closely after how we calculate the flexible ramping product requirements. The full imbalance reserve requirement will be procured in the scheduling run in each market interval up to a scheduling run relaxation parameter that is set above the low priority self-scheduled exports, but below CAISO self-scheduled load. And we have a full slide on this topic next. Like I mentioned before, the IFM will utilize upward and downward deployment scenarios similar to the flexible ramping product in real time to consider transmission constraints, to ensure deliverability, and also to has the effect of having nodal prices. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we're no longer proposing to procure imbalance reserves based on a demand curve as we did in the previous proposal. We'll go into a little more detail on this. A demand curve has the effect of considering the trade-off between energy clearing prices and the expected cost of not meeting the imbalance reserve requirement, and thus could relax the requirement under certain conditions. In particular, it could mean that high-priced economic exports or low-priority self-scheduled exports clear before we meet our imbalance reserve requirement. So relaxation of the requirement essentially means that the ISO may not be able to cover its real-time ramping and uncertainty needs, and thus that may trigger system operators to continue to resort to out-of-market actions that imbalance reserves were intended to prevent. Next slide, please. Here's the cost allocation for imbalance reserves up and down. I'm not going to read off each of these, but the general concept is that imbalance reserve costs should be allocated to actions that drive the need for the product in the first place. So basically, actions that cause system conditions to change between day ahead and real time, that require the redispatch of resources in real time. We also continue to propose a two-tiered allocation where any remaining costs after the tier 1 allocation get allocated to meter demand. The proposal has a little more more detail than the slide does on how the various components may net against each other. Next slide, please. We've also included in the proposal a no-pay process for imbalance reserves. Stakeholders commented that that to just simply take back the imbalance reserve awards of the resource for a resource that did not make itself available in real time was not punitive enough to provide a strong incentive to deliver. So therefore, we are now proposing that as part of this no pay, a resource would be charged the higher of the set of FRU prices in real time or the imbalance reserve up price. I'll also note that this slide says, quote, less than the 5-minute uncertainty award, which correlates to the deviation settlement design that we will talk about soon. And I think that's it for IFM.
Yeah, do you want to go ahead and open up for questions?
Sure.
Looks like we do have Alva back in the queue, so we'll start with Alva, and then there's another question in the chat.
All right, Alva, your line's unmuted. Hello. Please go ahead.
Yeah, this is actually easier than the old system, I think. But just if you could go back the previous slide, and then I almost wanted to ask about this slide, but both of these, so the allocation of imbalance reserve costs, and then the next slide as well on the no pay. I would just suggest that Dan's question becomes very relevant here because batteries may find themselves either having apparent deviations that would have costs allocated to them, or as in this slide, they would be unable to provide imbalance reserves due to how their state of charge is being managed by CAISO in the markets. And so I don't know whether you're planning on any kind of dispensation for batteries, but I think it becomes an important question because the state of, essentially the CAISO's own market processes can make it impossible for batteries to supply reserves in particular periods.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting observation and something that we probably need to spend some more time thinking about. I don't know if any of the other ISO panelists have any thoughts.
And don't forget to unmute yourself.
Yeah, this is Brad. I don't have anything to add.
We'll add it to the list of things to consider as we move forward to draft final proposal. I think that's a good suggestion.
Thank you, James.
All right, we do have another caller in the queue. Caller, your line is being unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, it's Callie Wells with WPTF again. If you want to defer this, I'm not sure if you're going to talk later on in the slides about if the resources have an underlying energy bid that's greater than a certain price, they'll be ineligible for imbalance reserves up. Or do you have some more detailed slides later and you want me to defer?
Yeah, we do. It does make sense in this section, but because it was sort of a bigger topic, I gave it its own set of slides later in the presentation.
No, that's okay. Do you mind when you get to that section to kind of talk through the interplay between you're trying to procure 100% of the imbalance reserve up in the ISM, but you're in effect not allowing all that capacity that's offered in to be eligible for procurement? Kind of talk through the interplay, the trade-off you guys made by going that route versus others that you've considered, because it almost seems like you're cutting off supply that's being made available to the market based on some sort of maximum price that you're going to talk about.
Yeah, that's a great observation, and I will talk to that.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
All right, and we do not have any additional callers in the verbal queue at this time. Oh, actually, we do have one more that just popped up.
Yeah, it's like two, right? Dan Williams also? Dan and
That's
Jeff?
correct. Dan, your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, I think I may have double requested somehow, but just kind of following on Callie's question just there. So what happens if you hit an infeasibility in the IRU procurement? Is that something that you would then sort of solve out of market through RUC if the operators felt like they needed to, and then maybe that would allow you to access some of that ineligible capacity that was ineligible based on bid price?
Well, okay, so let's just get to this. Let's just dive into this now then, because these are good questions. So the effect of limiting the capacity segments under the P97.5 price sort of does restrict, the quantity, the capacity that can be scheduled for awarded imbalance reserves. And I think that we are going to need to sort of play with where exactly we draw the line, because you can imagine that if the P97.5 price forecast was too low, you may artificially be sort of limiting yourself to not being able to even clear your own imbalance reserve requirement. And so we may need to sort of tweak the price level in this case when there's an infeasibility is probably most likely what we would do. But I think we sort of need to continue to work that out, exactly how that will work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that is the issue then, is just kind of, and I guess goes somewhat to thinking about the procurement target, and if it's likely to be roughly equivalent to what the current RUC high confidence forecast is. It seems like we've been hitting infeasibilities in RUC on more tight system condition days much more frequently this summer. And if that sort of persisted into the future, then it would seem we may be hitting infeasibilities in IRU procurement down the road as well. And so just kind of thinking about, what happens when that happens, and whether you then try and do something out of market to resolve it, or you just accept that maybe you're a little bit short covering that uncertainty and then have to deal with that in the real-time market. So just, I think, a number of things to kind of work through there.
Thank you, Dan. Go ahead and we can take Jeff's question. We do have a couple of chat questions too that I can read off, but we'll go to Jeff.
Problem. Jeff, your line is being unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hello? Hello, can you hear me?
Go. Yeah, if you could just state who you're affiliated as well.
It's Jeff calling from CWR. The question is, how about what are the differences on the cost allocation ISO proposed at this time? If we compare to a previous proposal, what different for the cost allocation on the imbalance reserve and reliability capacity, the two day-ahead market product?
Can we go back to the imbalance reserve cost allocation slide, Christina?
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Are you asking if there are differences between the last proposal?
Yes.
In the cost allocations?
Yes.
I think that there are probably some slight differences. I don't know if James Lynn is on the phone. James, are you on?
I know you had to jump off. James, you'll have to unmute yourself if you are on.
I see him listed as a panelist. Let's come back to this question at the end, and we'll ask James when he returns to answer it, because I know there are some subtle differences, but I'm not sure off the top of my head what they were.
Okay. Okay, I can I will check and review the first revised proposal and compare both different. Okay, thank you very much. And also, I have another question regarding in general. How about the efficiency and effectiveness on this ISO proposal if compared to the current data market in general? Or ISO can provide you analysis on the efficiency or effectiveness analysis on this new ISO proposal.
Yeah, this is James. So I understood the question to be if the CAISO could provide any additional analysis on the efficiency of the proposal, and I'm guessing you're probably referring to the market formulation that we're proposing, including imbalance reserves. Is that kind of your question?
Yes, but at this time, I also propose to separate MarketPower Mitigation between integrated power market and the RAC. So I don't know if I also implement this design, it's compared to current market, seems like more of the steps for the market process. I don't know. So this is why I'm thinking if possibly I also can provide analysis for on the effectiveness if possible.
Yeah, so that's a good point.
Yeah.
So well, Brad, let me. So I think one point is that, we do add an extra step into this, an extra market power mitigation step. We are going to be evaluating the efficiency of that step and its impact on runtime and market performance. We've had conversations with our technology team and don't have any concerns about that at present. But Brad, do you have anything additional to add to that?
No, I was just asking to clarify the question. I wasn't sure what he meant by efficiency, but if that's what he is asking, you answered it.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would imagine that potentially in the draft final proposal that we would have some comment about the impact of the additional paths on the market performance and solve time. But like I said, the indications are that it should be pretty minimal, and there are no real concerns at present for that.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, and we do have another question that just came into the verbal queue.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, Joshua, your line's being unmuted. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Joshua Arnold, PG&E. I just wanted to back up and support that last question regarding the impact of the new market run on general timelines. This has been a problem before in this exact initiative where concerns were raised to be responded and were responded to with the idea that CAISO would be able to do something that it just couldn't do in the end. I think this is actually a pretty significant risk in the whole process in getting the day-ahead market to finishing clear at the appropriate time, within the appropriate time frame. So I would really like to help, if we can, prioritize this evaluation properly before we go too far forward, because I think this really is a very critical part of the issue. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh. I think that's a fair comment. The fallback will be that if it is determined that the additional market power mitigation passes, the impact it has on market solve time and market performance is too high, then we would revert back to the old proposal where we would continue to have a single market power mitigation run and mitigate reliability capacity offers in that, pre-IFM market power mitigation. Now, we think that the benefit of an additional market power mitigation pass is high enough to go forward, and we will, so we will see.
Okay.
I think that's a fair comment.
Yeah, because, let's be honest. In theory, what you're proposing would be more effective than just doing it in 3 passes. I think in theory, you raise some valid points from a technical perspective. I just want to make sure you can do it, because if we have to evaluate the initiative on its merits, it's really good to know what we're evaluating. But I do think that if you can do it, it does have merit to look at.
Yeah, I'll jump ahead a little bit. One of the design elements we're proposing to try to mitigate any concern about market runtime is, the default RUC optimization horizon is 72 hours. The RUC market power mitigation pass we would run for a 24-hour period. So that's one way we are proposing to try to get ahead of this issue. But I still think it's a fair comment and something we should take seriously.
Okay, then one quick thought on that would be to make sure that the extra long start resources that are being looked at into the 72-hour RUC are appropriately considered and that they're not shut out of the process in any way. I don't think they would be, but that's the only conflict I might see. But thank you.
Sure. Yep, thank you.
All right, any other questions in the queue? Adam? We do have a couple
have any additional. Oh, no additional questions in the verbal queue at this time.
Okay, great. And then we do have a couple chat questions from Kelly, sorry, the print is really small, Haraguchi. First question, what is the resolution of the unit of observation in the quantile regression, a 15-minute interval or an hour?
Mm-hmm. So this is Amber. It's in an hourly interval. But it is taking into consideration the difference between the granularities, right? Where the day ahead is an hourly average, and once you get into RTPD, it's a 15-minute average. So there is logic within that to help account for the difference between hourly and 15, but it's going to be in an hourly granularity.
Great, thank you. And then another one from Kelly. The current proposal references Appendix C of the Flexible Ramping Product Refinements Initiative. Should we infer that the methodology is largely identical for the day imbalance reserve requirement?
Yeah, the methodology between the real-time flex ramp and the current proposal for the imbalance and quantile regression are very similar.
Great, thank you, Amber. And thanks for your patience, Kelly. Okay, it doesn't look like we have any other questions. We'll go ahead and move on.
Okay. So we'll move on to the new proposed market power mitigation pass for RUC. So again, the reason why we're proposing this is to have a separate market run specifically to evaluate competitiveness of reliability capacity offers and potentially mitigate uncompetitive reliability capacity prices. So this RUC market power mitigation pass would hold the IFM schedules fixed and use unmitigated reliability capacity bids to procure reliability capacity to meet the CAISO net demand forecasts. Any resource with a net positive marginal congestion contribution on uncompetitive constraints will have their reliability capacity bids mitigated. We will mitigate the reliability capacity offers to the greater of a default availability bid or a competitive availability price. It would be the same default availability bid as mitigation for imbalance reserves, but a different competitive availability price because they're different runs. Getting to Josh and Jeff's questions, we're evaluating the feasibility of this new pass in terms of runtime and market performance. We will be limiting the RUC market power mitigation pass, or proposing to limit the RUC market power mitigation pass to a 24-hour optimization horizon. And any mitigated bid in the 24-hour RUC market power mitigation pass will apply across the standard 72-hour RUC optimization. So I'll just open up if anybody had any follow-up questions on the RUC market power mitigation path or comments.
And I do see we have one question in the queue. Caller, your line is being unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, this is Callie Wells with WPTF again. Can you refresh my memory? In the RUC, when you guys are running that, are the VER energy schedules included?
I believe that the RUC utilizes the VER forecast. They had VER forecast, but maybe Brad or maybe even Amber might correct me if I'm wrong.
No, this is Amber. There's a comparison in the RUC of what was bid into IFM versus the CAISO VER forecast, and that comparison is run.
Okay. I'm just trying to think through, and maybe you can kind of elaborate on this a little bit more, whether or not mitigation RUC, since I'm assuming you'll be using the same local market power mitigation formulation, it's based on transmission flows. So I'm wondering how aligned the transmission flows would be between the IFM and RUC, and if you could actually end up in some odd mitigation results. If, for example, maybe a transmission is considered uncompetitive in the IFM mitigation run, but not in RUC. And I think that really comes down to how different those transmission flows are between the two. So I'm not sure if you guys have thought through that, or maybe in the next iteration can shed some light on that. Would be great.
This is James. I think that's a great question. We have yet to post a technical appendix with this new market formulation. I would imagine that that may be part of the discussion in the technical appendix. And if it's not, I will jot that note down, and maybe we can communicate that as part of it.
Okay, yeah, that would be great. And I want to also echo the timeline question. I know in the paper you mentioned, only running the market power mitigation for 24 hours and then doing the actual RUC process for the 72 hours. And I did have a similar thought on the extremely long start resources. More so if you use the mitigated bids from the 24-hour mitigation path in the 72-hour process, if there again could be some weird impact on extremely long start resources, and whether maybe they'll actually get a commitment instruction based on bids that were mitigated because you have, you're only looking at the 24-hour mitigation process and applying that mitigation for the full 72-hour. Again, just something I'm thinking through, but if if you guys have any thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, this is James. I think it's a valid concern, and I've got as we build out the sort of technical formulation of the MarketPower mitigation paths, we'll definitely keep that in mind. What's the impact on the extra lawn start resources? Yep.
Yeah, no, appreciate it. It's something new we're having to wrap our heads around, is mitigation and the REC process and how that differs between kind of IFM, which is, energy schedules and flows. But I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you can also include that in your comments, your written comments, Callie, these requests, just make sure we get it, we have it documented. That'd be great.
Absolutely. Yep.
Appreciate it. Thank you. All right. Any other questions? I don't see anything in the chat.
We do not have any additional questions in the verbal queue.
Okay. So we'll move on to the REC process. The REC process will hold the IFM schedules fixed and procure incremental capacity for reliability capacity up, or decremental capacity called reliability capacity down, based on how the IFM energy schedules compare to the CAISO net load forecast. We will continue to use the REC to establish the export and import energy schedule that can be tagged for checkout. We also use REC to enhance REC to now transition multi-stage generator resources in the downward direction, but not turning them off completely, and also establishing their binding configuration. Here is the reliability capacity cost allocation. So the reliability, again, I'm not going to read through each of these details, but essentially the reliability capacity up and down costs should be allocated to the primary drivers for the need of reliability capacity in either direction. And again, in the beginning of the presentation, I noted that those were from load scheduling differences with the CAISO load forecast, the net position of virtual bids, and also how VERs are scheduled relative to the CAISO VER forecast. I'll note here that underscheduled VERs are not part of the RCD cost allocation. For the reliability capacity up cost allocation, and we'll get into the difference between a non-CAISO and a CAISO forecasted VER. But if a VER resource chooses to be a non-forecasted VER, it would be part of the cost allocation for reliability capacity up. And similar to imbalance reserves, we continue to propose a two-tiered allocation for both of these costs, where if there's additional costs remaining after tier one, they would be allocated to meter demand. Next slide, please. We also proposing a more punitive no-pay rule for reliability capacity up and reliability capacity down, whereby if the resource in real time does not follow through and there must offer obligations and make their designated capacity available, they'd be charged the higher of the RTPD FRU price or the RCU price. And for reliability capacity down, it would be the higher of the RTPD FRD price or the RCD price. We would have some changes to bid cost recovery based on incorporating the new products. The imbalance reserve revenues and costs will be considered in the IFM bid cost recovery over the day. The reliability capacity revenue and costs will be considered in the real-time market bid cost recovery over the day, similar to how, RUC works today in the bid cost recovery, where the surpluses in the RUC BCR will net against surpluses or losses in the RUC BCR will net against the real-time market BCR. And the flexible ramping product revenue and costs will remain in the real-time market bid cost recovery. I think there might be one more slide.
I think that's it. Let me check.
Oh, okay.
Yep, so we'll go ahead. It looks like Josh is back in the queue. Again, if you joined audio through the WebEx, you want to use the raise hand icon to the right of the chat box. Or if you just dialed into the meeting, you want to press #2 to raise your hand. Looks like we have 2 people in the queue so far. Adam, we'll go to the first caller, please.
Right, no problem. Joshua, your line's being unmuted. Please go ahead.
Thank you again, Josh Arnold, PG&E. Yeah, I'm thinking about the penalties for failure to provide your must-offer application. And I'm trying to think this through. And I'm wondering if there is an exploit that might be available here to an entity who's less scrupulous, or maybe who has less transparency for the CAISO. If someone did not offer their RCU-RCD, especially if the RCU-RCD was particularly constrained in the day-ahead solution, could that open a possibility by withholding your MOO capacity in the real-time market? Could that make it easier to then spike the real-time prices to your advantage? So if all your penalty is either the RCX or the FRX, whichever is higher, those capacity prices are limited, whereas energy can get to $2,000. And that could happen in either the FMM or the RTD, depending on where the capacity, because you're bidding in for both the FMM and RTD each hour. Failure to bid capacity could result in an infeasibility in either of those cases. So I'm just thinking this through, and I'm not sure that I like where my brain is going on it.
Yeah, this is Brad Cooper. Good question. Off the top of my head, I'm not seeing how, for example, reliability capacity up withholding would be anything different than someone not bidding into their offering pursuant to their RUC schedule today. When you think about withholding, it gets more complicated because you got to think about the impact of market prices and the rest of potential imbalance energy exposure to the rest of the withholder's supply portfolio. But we can consider your question more.
Okay, thanks. I'm just trying to think this through, especially now that it's bidirectional. And with that and the introduction course of IRU, IRD, which I will also have questions on, it seems like there's an increase in possible risk. And I could be completely making things up because that's sometimes what we have to do. But yeah, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Josh. We'll go to the next question.
All right, moving on to the next caller. Bonnie, your line's being unmuted. Please go ahead.
Thank you. This is Bonnie Blair representing the 6 cities. Am I coming through okay?
Yep, we can hear you, Bonnie. Thank you.
Great. So I have 2 questions. The first goes to the relationship between the RUC MarketPower Mitigation methodology and the role of the energy price. And as I understand it, you're basically going to disqualify a resource from providing the RUC capacity if its energy price exceeds the the 97.5 percentile. Do I have that right?
Yep.
Okay, so the question is, suppose that somebody in the RUC, in that RUC pass, bids an energy price that is less than the 97.5 percentile and gets an award. Can the energy price be increased in real-time bidding? And if so, wouldn't they be able to sort of avoid the market power mitigation in the RUC?
That's a great question. I do want to distinguish that the what you're calling the market power mitigation is not exactly what we're calling market power mitigation for RUC. It's sort of a separate component whereby essentially the problem is that the RUC has no way of distinguishing, between the energy costs of the resources that it's deciding between. And if we have RA resources all bidding the same price, which is zero, we don't have any efficient way of sorting between those resources. Who would be the most efficient to award in real time? And so this mechanism is trying to sort of accomplish something different than market power mitigation. But that being said, I think your question is valid and something that we need to think through. Whether you could sort of, bear the risk of bidding lower than your cost to sort of fit yourself underneath this price, and then in real time, not have any restrictions on the price that you can bid for that capacity, which is basically your concern, right?
And this is Brad. I'd add that the RUC market power mitigation is designed to mitigate the availability bids. It's not addressing energy bids, but in real time, to the extent someone had a reliability capacity award and then in real time was trying to exert market power in energy, that would be picked up by real-time market power mitigation, real-time local market power mitigation.
I see. So then the real-time energy bid could be mitigated separately. Right. In other words, through the. Right. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Okay. All right, that makes sense. Second question I think is simpler. Are the imbalance reserves products, is bidding for those products voluntary or compulsory?
I think I'll have to have Bridget or Greg correct me, but I think that it will be compulsory for resources that have flexible RA on them, and then non-compulsory for the rest.
Yeah, that's correct,
sense.
James. Our current thought is we would be redesigning the flexible RA product to align with the imbalance reserve product. So instead of the way it's designed today, meaning that maximum 3-hour net load ramp, it would now be designed to meet the maximum imbalance reserve requirement over the month. And it'd be 15-minute dispatchable as opposed to 3-hour ramping.
Okay, that makes sense to me. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Bonnie. So it looks like Josh's hand is raised. Is that from before, Adam?
That is from before. Let me get those out of there. And we do not have any additional questions in the queue.
Okay, we do have a chat question from Jerry Melcher. Has there been any simulation done with these changes with market and operating data from last year's mid-August heat wave event? If somebody could respond.
Not at this time, to my knowledge.
Okay. all we have. Okay, on to deviation settlement.
Okay, so I will do my best to give this complicated topic its justice. And this is something that we discussed at the May Market Surveillance Committee meeting. So in a couple of slides, I posted the link to the presentation where George Angelides walked through a spreadsheet example with the Market Surveillance Committee meeting that may provide some more of the technical details. Our intention today is just to provide more of the what and why and a little less of the how. So we'll go to the next slide. So starting with some terminology, we have to break up ramp into two separate categories, and this sort of mimics the flexible ramping product here. The first is forecasted movement, which is the change in energy schedules between intervals in the same market run. So in the diagram there, the forecasted movement is the positive difference between the energy schedule in T-1 and the energy schedule in T. Now, uncertainty awards are additional ramp capability, but they're not scheduled for energy. They're held back held back as capacity to meet changes in net load between market runs. And in this diagram, the dotted black lines represent uncertainty awards, where the positive blue arrow represents the upward difference between the forecasted movement and the upward uncertainty requirement, and then the red downward arrow is representing the difference between the forecasted movement and the downward uncertainty requirement. Now, for FRP, that forecasted movement section that is above the original energy schedule, but below but also overlapping with the red arrow in FRD, is actually paid the upward or the forecasted movement price and then charged the downward FRD price. And so it gets complicated how these products are settled. And one may ask why we can't just simply design a direct deviation settlement between imbalance reserves and flexible ramping product. And it's because really the way that the products are priced, the way that they're configured are different. And so we have to come up with a sort of creative design to try to capture ramp deviation settlement. So let's go to the next slide. So I got to some of the complications already, one of which is that the granularity of uncertainty awards for imbalance reserves is based on a 15-minute ramp capability, whereas uncertainty awards for flexible ramping product are based on 5-minute flexible ramping product, and so we have to build that in. Other uncertainties come because you can have ramp from imbalance reserves both from unloaded capability, but also from movement in your energy schedule in the opposite direction. So if your forecasted movement is moving downward to the next interval, you essentially have additional upward capability, both because you can just simply stay at your original schedule and not move down, but also you can go from your original schedule in the upward direction, and all of these need to be sort of netted out. Let's go to the next slide. So, really what we're trying to address with a ramp deviation settlement is 3 problems that could occur without one. First is that similar to why we incorporated those no-pay rules, if you have capacity that's not available in real time, it reduces the available supply of ramp and thus puts upward pressure on its price. So therefore, resources that do not provide the availability they're obligated to based on their capacity awards should settle those imbalances at prices that reflect the real-time conditions that they contributed to. The second thing is that without a deviation settlement, a resource could receive a double payment for energy opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is part of the settlement for both imbalance reserves and for flexible ramping products. And when a resource could have, the marginal price of imbalance reserves in the day-ahead market is based both on bids and it's based on opportunity costs with energy and other resources. And then flexible ramping product in real time is priced based purely on opportunity costs. So the opportunity cost portions of those awards overlap, and you could a resource could have the same energy schedule and provide the same ramp, but get paid for the energy opportunity cost twice. The last thing that the deviation settlement is intended to prevent is a double payment for forecasted movement. So in the IFM, we run a 24-hour optimization, and all 24-hour market intervals are settled simultaneously, meaning there's no advisory intervals or prices. And the forecasted movement, the opportunity cost based on forecasted movement is embedded in the energy price in the day-ahead market. So when a resource receives an energy payment in the day-ahead market, it incorporates both, marginal energy bids and forecasted movement opportunity cost. In the real-time market, we're settling one interval at a time, and I linked in the paper to some BPM examples that show why we need to have a side payment of forecasted movement in the real-time market, because what can happen is in an advisory interval, the prices can reflect opportunity costs for resources that are held back for energy in a future interval. And then when you get to the next interval, it forgets about the opportunity costs of the previous interval, and therefore the opportunity costs don't get incorporated into the energy price. And so what effectively can happen is that a resource could be double paid for forecasted movement in the day-ahead market and as a side payment in the real-time market. And so the deviation settlement addresses that. Let's go to the next slide. So here's a simple summary of the ramp, well, as simple as possible, a summary of the ramp deviation settlement of forecasted movement and uncertainty awards. So starting in the ISM, like I mentioned, resources receive forecasted movement payment implicitly in the energy price. In ISM, a resource receives an uncertainty award in their imbalance reserve award, and they get paid that marginal clearing price. Going to FMM, for forecasted movement, you would settle the deviation from IFM of the 15-minute forecasted movement that was provided in IFM. And then for forecasted movement in RTD, you would settle the deviation from FMM of the 5-minute forecasted movement. For uncertainty awards in FMM, you would settle the deviation from the embedded 5-minute ramp within the imbalance reserve award. And it's the 5-minute ramp within the imbalance reserve award because the FMM, like I said, the FMM takes into consideration 5-minute ramping where the imbalance reserve takes into account the 15-minute ramping. And tying that back to a previous slide, it's why the imbalance reserve no pay excludes this 5-minute portion here, because, you know, if a resource was to offer none of their imbalance reserve award, then essentially 5 minutes of it, 5 of their 15 minutes of it gets taken back in this deviation settlement, and then the other 10 minutes of it gets taken back in the no pay. Okay, and then in RTD, you can settle the deviation of the uncertainty award directly from FMM because they're the same time granularity. And the bottom slide there just reiterates that, you know, the imbalance reserve no pay, you know, collects the difference if none of the imbalance reserve capacity was offered. Let's see if is there one more slide, or is that it? Okay, so here are the links to the to George going through this in more detail at the MSC discussion, and also a link to a spreadsheet that works out how the deviation settlement works on sort of more of a step-by-step basis and gets down to the more details. So I'll stop there for questions or comments.
All right, we do have one caller in the queue.
Yep.
All right, Alan, your line is being unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, this is Alan Meck from SDG&E. If you could go back to slide 31, I think it was. Yeah, maybe this is a little bit of nitpicking, but it seems to me if FRD is being paid, okay, so let me figure out how to describe this. The difference in megawatts between energy at T-1 and energy at T, it seems like you're double paying based on this for that portion of FRD that is at the energy level of T-1 to T, because instead of paying for that extra FRD, couldn't you just back down those energy schedules that you're expecting to ramp up? Does that make sense? Hopefully that made sense.
Yeah, it does. And I tried to describe the same exact thing you tried to describe, and you probably described it better. So I took this picture from existing documentation, and I agree it can be improved in a subtle way, because I wish you can see my cursor, but the small portion of the red arrow that starts at ENIT, so starts there where it intersects the green line, and then goes down to the previous energy level. So that portion is paid forecasted movement for that upward portion, but then charged flexible ramping product down price for the red, for that overlapping portion. Yeah, so that gets at your sort of your double payment question. It's actually charged back to FRD price. And then from that, you know, midpoint down to the downward uncertainty requirement, it's paid flexible ramping down for that part. If, you know, if they were to get both sides of the award. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Thanks, Alan.
All right, and we do not have any additional callers in the queue at this time.
Okay, and again, you're welcome to send your questions in the chat. I don't see anything at the moment, but just give it a second. Okay, I don't see any other questions.
Oh, this last slide, I forgot about this last slide. The deviation settlement applies only to imbalance reserves in relationship to flexible ramping product. There's no reliability, capacity up and down are not part of that deviation settlement. Oh, there's actually quite a few more slides. I apologize.
There are two more.
Yeah, sorry about that. So the deviation settlement does impact convergence bids in a subtle way. So, you know, virtual supply is paid the day-ahead price in IFM, and virtual demand is charged the day-ahead price in IFM. And then in FMM, you know, they liquidate where virtual supply is then charged the FMM price and virtual demand is paid the FMM price. Now, let's see. So in the case where, hold on one sec. I lost my screen for a sec. Sorry about that. Okay, I'm back. So since the IFM energy price includes the settlement of forecasted movement as we talked about, the virtual supply and demand will then have a forecasted movement deviation settlement at the FMM FRP price. Next slide, please. And then the deviation settlement also has a subtle impact on EIM-based schedules. Forecasted movement is included in the EIM-based schedule changes, similar to CAISO day-ahead schedules today. So there would be a deviation settlement of forecasted movement between the base schedule and the FMM schedule. But because there are no imbalance reserve awards included in the EIM-based schedules to meet the uncertainty in FMM, there's no deviation settlement for uncertainty, and therefore any FRP awards are paid incrementally.
I think that was your last slide, James, in this section. So we'll go ahead and see if there are any questions. Yeah. Again, if you're in, if you joined audio via WebEx, you can select the raise hand icon or the hand icon above the chat window, or if you joined via the phone only, press pound 2.
All right, and I do not see any questions in the verbal queue as of yet.
Yeah. And I don't see any questions in the chat either. Okay. You can move on, James.
All right. Yeah. So for this section, it's going to get into some of the other design elements, and I'll stop after each topic for discussion and questions. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about this topic already. What we are trying to do is, in this topic, is, like I mentioned, the RUC optimization considers availability bids when, or I guess now reliability, capacity, up and down bids when choosing which resources to award for those products. And it does not have any insight into what the energy costs of those resources are. And ideally, we would have resources committed for reliability, capacity up, and imbalance reserves up, that if they were scheduled for energy in real time, they would be the cheapest resources. And, you know, it's also sort of trying to prevent resources that have energy bids of $900 of consistently getting imbalance reserve up or reliability capacity up awards when, if we were, you know, even if they provided real-time bids, they would almost never get awarded. So what we propose to do is, prior to the day-ahead market, the CAISO will calculate and publish a P97.5 price that estimates if we were to hit our P97.5 uncertainty, what the price would be, and then to use that price to establish eligibility for the capacity segments of certain resources to be awarded imbalance reserves up and reliability capacity up. So in this example, if the CAISO were to set a $400 P97.5 price that was calculated and published prior to the market run, and a resource has a bid curve that looks as follows, where from 0 to 50 megawatts, they're bidding a price of $100, 50 to 100 megawatts bidding a price of $250, from 100 to 150 bidding a price of $450, and then 150 to 175 bidding a price of $500, that any of those segments above $400 would be ineligible for an upward capacity product award. So in a sense, although this may not be exactly the constraint that is implemented, the sum of the imbalance reserve up and reliability capacity up awards would be set to the maximum imbalance reserve up and reliability capacity up that one can be awarded would be 100 megawatts minus the energy schedule. So if the energy schedule for this resource came out to be 75, then the imbalance reserve up and reliability capacity up in combination cannot exceed 25 megawatts. And I know Callie asked me to talk about a certain topic that I don't know that I did. So if there's anything I can expand on, please let me know. But otherwise, I'll stop there for any questions or feedback.
Yeah, it looks like all of in the queue. Dan Williams, yeah, go ahead.
All right, yeah, we do have several people in the queue. Alva, your line's being unmuted. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. So I had just a couple of comments on this. One is, and you've laid it out pretty nicely here in terms of one of the basic problems here is that to me this is it reminds me of what was said by CISA at the Energy Storage Enhancements initiative a couple of days ago, which is in some ways you're still solving problems for a natural gas-based system, whereas we're now entering a world where most of the resources are more opportunity cost-based. And so the likelihood that somebody who has a bid curve where two of their segments are far out of the money based on the 97.5 criterion wouldn't just put their bids at $399 to be able to get an IRU or RCU award, and then they can jack it up as much as they like in real time. It doesn't seem realistic to me, and I think this whole approach is going to be entirely without teeth ultimately, and you'd be better off just not even doing it at all if this is the only thing that can be done to control for people, with high energy costs. You're not wanting to award RCU to those resources. The other problem that I see, and I wanted to ask whether you'd had a look at the 97.5 levels for, I don't know if this is is this a single value for the whole day or is it an hourly value? Because, or even if it's for the whole day, if it's a day with very low volatility, you could end up setting a 97.5 level based on your own assessment that ends up having the effect, I think Callie was talking about it, where you really are unable to procure the imbalance reserves because you've set your price based on your statistical picture in a way that is inconsistent with how the market and how market conditions actually clear. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Alba. And some good things to think about. I don't have any direct response to your first comment, other than I think those are good points that we need to consider. And the second point, kind of like I said when Dan had asked, I think that P97.5 price, that this is something that we move forward with, would have to be fairly adjustable. And it may be that we select a different uncertainty level. It could be the 100th percentile price, which would be, maybe the maximum observed uncertainty, or the maximum estimated uncertainty, and use that level to establish a price or something like that, because we would not want to set a price to which we would limit the or basically get ourselves into an infeasibility where we can't even get the imbalance reserve and reliability capacity up that we needed, because we've limited those resources too strictly. So I appreciate the comments. Good things to think about.
Thanks, James.
All right, moving to the next caller in the queue. All right, Dan, your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Great, thanks, Dan Williams, Customized Energy Solutions. So actually just going back to the EIM slide, I think it was one or two prior. I'm not really sure what question to ask here, other than just to ask you to expand a little bit on kind of the process for developing those EIM-based schedules day ahead, and kind of what the end result is of this. I maybe late in the day, and I'm just not thinking of this properly, but didn't think that there were financially binding day ahead EIM-based schedules to sort of run this process against.
Yeah, and I may ask if James Lynn is on the phone to help me out with this, but I think, well, why don't I ask James, if James is on the phone, maybe to fill in this blank, so I don't say anything wrong.
Yeah, and this is Brad Cooper. I'll let James respond, but we're not trying to say that there's some kind of settlement for EIM-based schedules for forecasted movement. What we mean is that forecasted movement is implicitly included in the EIM-based schedules.
Okay, so you're basically saying that the EIM entities are sort of already taking care of this concept themselves, so then would continue to be dealing with it in FRP effectively.
What we're trying to say is that cost associated with the forecasted movement of a base schedule, that's already factored into the base schedule. Not that we settle that directly with base schedules. And that cost of the forecasted movement is also included in CalISO day-ahead schedules. And yes, we settle that in the day-ahead market, but we're not trying to apply. We settle forecasted movement. It's in base schedules. The concept is, I'll let James answer more fully, is that we're doing the deviation settlement relative to the base schedules, just like we do relative to the CalISO day-ahead schedules.
Gotcha. That makes a lot more sense. I think it was reading too much into it for it to be one slide. So thanks, Brad.
All right, any other questions?
We do have another question in the queue. Caller, your line is being unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, this is Callie Wells with WPTF again. So I have a couple, detailed questions on the formulation for the P97.5, and then a more general observation. So on the detailed questions, is this going to be a nodal calculation to where you could end up with resources at different points on the system having a different P97.5 price? And then are you anticipating this based on day ahead or real-time prices?
This is James. I think we envisioned the price to be a single system price, an hourly single system price, so not a nodal price. And sort of the way that we would actually come up with this price is a little bit up in the air. You know, one way we could do it is to use submitted day-ahead bids up to a certain time point to sort of, you know, get a picture in that way. It could also be like purely statistical. And so, you know, we've yet to sort of iron out exactly how we would come about this specific price, but the intention would be that I would intend to calculate the price level on a system level that would reflect the highest level of uncertainty we're covering with imbalance reserves.
Okay, so sorry, I might have been misunderstanding this. So is this a P97.5 based on the offers or energy prices?
It would, well, I guess my point was that we could potentially use the energy offers that had been submitted, you know, prior to the day-ahead market, or a statistical way of estimating the energy price, or a combination of both, to figure out what this P97.5 price is. So, but the estimate would be for the P97.5 like system energy price that we're trying to estimate, and not the P97.5 offer price. Okay,
I appreciate that. Yeah, it does. Yeah, I think maybe prior to the next iteration of the proposal, having some details and maybe some examples out on how it would be calculated and what those numbers would look like would be really helpful.
Sure.
And then my more general, I guess, observation or comment is there's been a lot of kind of questions about this P97.5 and the impact it might have on, you know, cutting supply unintentionally. So have you guys thought through, I guess, whether or not it makes sense to apply this and the mitigation? To me, it seems like this could be something set up in a similar way to spinning reserves and how they're offered in. They have kind of a very similar scenario where they have an underlying energy bid. They also offer into the capacity that if they're awarded the spinning capacity, the market can dispatch that capacity for energy based on the underlying energy curve. So just curious, you know, and spinning reserves obviously just has a bid cap, and then they have the energy mitigation. So I'm curious if you guys have thought much about just using a similar structure as spinning reserves for this product.
I'm not. I mean, I'm not as familiar.
Yeah, James, this is Greg. I can take that one. Yeah, Callie, we have thought about that, and I think the real difference between, particularly the imbalance reserve products and products like spinning reserve, is that, you know, spinning reserve is really a contingency product that we don't really expect to be dispatching very often, whereas the imbalance reserves is a capacity product that we actually expect to be dispatching in the real-time market, which is why, you know, we think this is an important issue that we should, you know, account for the energy bid in some way that comes along with that imbalance reserve capacity bid, so that, you know, we are taking that into account and hopefully getting the most efficient resources available for providing those imbalance reserves. You know, and it's something we've been struggling with, how to do that in a somewhat simple, straightforward way, which is where, you know, how we came up with this proposal. You know, and back to Alva's comments earlier, you know, I think that's another thing we need to consider, you know, whether we would want to cap the energy bids from the day-ahead market that were awarded imbalance reserves at that cap price when they come into real time, so that, you know, we avoid that potential gaming opportunity. You know, I think the downside of that is if costs do change significantly between day and real time, you could potentially be dispatching resources different than what their marginal costs are. But then on the other hand, maybe they could hedge those costs through their capacity bids, and that would be their marginal cost. But I guess, you know, we'd be I think this is one area where we're really looking for some stakeholder feedback on this to get some, detailed comments on how this might work. But, to answer your question, we do see this, fairly different product than the operating reserves because this is capacity that we would expect to dispatch on a regular basis in the real-time market.
Yeah.
Okay, I appreciate that. Go ahead, Brad.
Yeah,
sorry.
I'd add that this isn't a market power mitigation measure. This is just to be able to buy imbalance reserves not buy them from the most expensive energy resources in the market since they're likely to be dispatched. And in response to the point that someone could increase, get awarded imbalance reserves and then greatly increase their bid in the real-time market. We should think about that some more, but I seem to remember, and I don't remember if we discussed this on the paper, but I think our thought is that if they're unduly inflating their bid above their costs, that would be picked up by market power mitigation if they do have market power. But again, we can think about that some more. But again, like Greg said, we thought of various methods. We tried to come up with a method where we were considering, I think it was, both the cost of the capacity bid in conjunction with the energy bid and try to come up with the least cost solution, and none of those methodologies worked out to be implementable.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate that. I have a couple, follow-up thoughts on that. I understand what you're saying with the contingency reserves, but if I recall, they can offer in non-contingency reserves, and those can be dispatched by the market in real time without a contingency event. Now, I don't know how often that's happening, but that's why I keep going back to the spinning reserves, because there is the ability for non-contingent spin to be offered and dispatched by the market, and they just have kind of the bid cap on what they can offer spin at, which is, I think, $250. But and then outside of that, you allow kind of the competitive market forces to help, make sure that the offer prices, kind of go down towards marginal cost. So I think we'll give it some more thought on our end, and I guess I just ask that you guys give it some thought too on your end about the non-contingent spending reserves, and I think that actually does more align with this situation, and maybe that's a more simple approach is to kind of follow maybe a higher bid cap on the capacity, and then allow the energy market mitigation to take care of the rest.
I believe in practice anymore that. I believe it was a few years ago, I might not have this completely right, but we had a rule change that allow our operators to, they call it flag out the non-contingent spinning reserves and just enable them to only be dispatched in a contingency event. So I think in practice that the non-contingency spinning reserves are not dispatched for energy anymore, and we talked internally about a change to eliminate the dispatching of the contingency reserves for energy, because they're contingency reserves.
Okay, yeah. So they're taking out of market actions to switch the non-contingency reserves over to contingency. But within the market, they're still, when they're awarded, though, they're considered non-contingent. So I don't mean to take up more time on this, but just we'll give it some more thought, and if you guys can give it some more thought, too, that would be great.
Sure.
Thank you, Kelly. I do have one other person on the queue.
All right, Lindsay, your line is being unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, Lindsay Schlucker with Pacific Corp. I'm sorry to do this, but could we go back to the EIM-based schedule slide? So I want to be sure that I'm understanding this, because I had a similar question to Dan. So you're saying that there are no changes being proposed for the forecasted movement settlement for EIM, is that correct?
you trying to respond?
Okay.
Oh,
there you go.
well, this is Brad. I'll take that. There is no forecasted movement for settlement for EIM based schedules.
Correct. And so there's no proposed changes to the forecasted movement settlements for EIM for this, correct?
Were you able to hear, Brett?
Yeah, I'm just pausing because so there is no forecasted movement settlement for EIM based schedules. Now there is a forecasted movement settlement in real time, I believe, and I'm kind of I'll defer to James to answer that. I'm kind of blanking on the details.
Okay, yeah, because I'm aware there's the forecasted movement settlement in real time. I'm just wondering if there's any proposed changes to that.
Yeah, I'm not recalling. I'll defer to James.
James,
are you on mute?
This is James Friedrich. I'm not sure if I'm the James you're referring to, but in the proposal, the EIM participants are subject to the deviation settlement for FMM forecasted movement based on EIM schedules, and presumably that would carry through to be a deviation settlement with between FMM and RTD as well.
Okay, so there's a new settlement between the, I guess I'm just not following. So there is a new settlement between the forecast movement from the EIM-based schedules to the FMM, correct?
Correct. So I think it would essentially have the effect of not, well, yeah, again, I may be the wrong James to be answering this, but
yeah, James. So
we'll have to get what
Brad. I think what the answer is. I think what the answer is we are proposing changes to forecasted movement in FMM, where currently there is a double payment between the forecasted movement that's paid in FMM and between that and then the forecasted movement that is implicitly in IFM schedules. So the same thing will apply to forecasted movement relative to EIM-based schedules. There no longer will be a settlement for the portion that is implicit in the EIM-based schedules, and maybe we can let Settlement James chime in if I got that wrong.
Yeah, so I would, I think that's right. Yeah, and I think we, we would settle the forecasted movement portion of the flexible ramping product in FMM based on the difference between the forecasted, the quantity of forecasted movement awarded as FRP and the quantity of forecasted movement implicit in the base schedule already. So essentially, okay. if the forecasted movement quantity has not changed, then there would not be an FMM payment for forecasted movement, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Okay. Yeah, I would have liked to have seen an example or something so I could follow a little bit better, but I think I understand. So the price then that would be used for the settlement would be the FMM price for forecasted movement.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
All right, and we do have an additional caller in the queue. Alva, you're unmuted. Please go ahead.
Thanks. Just a couple of comments. I think going back to the subject of Callie's discussion, Greg's idea of essentially capping the portion of the energy bid that is has been taken for upward reserves, either imbalance or capacity, would be a potentially workable solution. And I know there are complexities in cyber, but I think that's definitely a concept that might be worth pursuing, because it would essentially impose the same requirement on real-time bids that have been used in making the procurement decision. I did want to express a little skepticism about Brad's idea that the 97.5 violations would be caught in MarketPower Mitigation, because they're dealing with two very different situations. One are sort of extreme situations that probably aren't going to be caught in the LNPM run. LNPM run is looking at what's the congestion that's actually forecast to occur in the expected case, I think. So I wouldn't trust that as being a way of catching those high real-time bids, if indeed they were an attempt to use market power because of having those awards. Thank you.
Thanks, Alva. Okay, anybody else in the queue?
Looks like we do have an additional caller in the queue.
Thank you.
Seth, your line is being unmuted. Please go ahead.
Thank you. This is Seth with Teach Energy. I just have a quick question, and maybe I'm just looking for more explanation. How do virtual awards have the forecasted movement deviation? Like, so they're not physical resources, they're virtual. So are they always going to be charged the deviation amount, or is there a situation where they could actually receive a payment? It's just not clear to me how that works.
Yeah, that's a good question. So what's happening is that the virtual awards are implicitly paid forecasted movement through the energy price in the day-ahead market, because the forecasted movement, a payment for forecasted movement is embedded within the prices. And so they essentially just get either paid back or charged back the FMM forecasted movement price in FMM to sort of equal out the two payments. Because otherwise they're basically getting a forecasted movement payment and not providing any movement. So it sort of nets each other out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it kind of does. Is there any way to know what that price will be for that amount? Like, is it a component of LMP that will be transparent, or is it just embedded in the LMP and you really don't see what that exact value is?
Yeah, I'm not sure that we could sort of back calculate what the portion of the energy LMP and day ahead is from forecasted movement, but it is just embedded now. And then in the real time in FMM, it is calculated separately and charged or paid as a side payment. So it just gets down to the fact that we're settling in the day ahead market all the intervals simultaneously, and so those prices just get embedded in whatever interval is needed to pay out that opportunity cost for forecasted movement.
And the charge will be based on the side payment in the FMM, side payment charges?
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Either a payment or a charge, yeah.
Any other questions, Seth?
No, thank you. Thank you. I'm good.
Great, thank you. We do have one more in the queue.
All right, Joshua, your line is being unmuted. Please go ahead.
Don't forget to unmute yourself, Josh.
Thank you very much. Yeah, auto mute on my side. Thank you for that. Josh Arnold, PG&E. One of the things I'm thinking about here, and this looking ahead at the slides is probably the best time to bring it up, and it was something that's been said a number of times, that you're trying to get the most efficient resources. And I have a foundational worry on that, because these awards are going to be going through in the day-ahead market. And reading through your proposal, they're going to be awarded locationally based off of expected congestion conditions, so that they are, in fact, in theory, available in the real time and deliverable. But I'm concerned that the congestion topography changes so heavily and so routinely between day ahead and real time that I don't know that that process and that the definition or the idea of efficient resources really fits with this process. Because really what we're coming down to on any of these things is not efficient dispatch per se. That should be a byproduct. It's a reliable dispatch. And I keep hearing the terms from you guys: efficiency, most efficient resources, bid caps, like this 97.5, and those are good ideas, but I'm starting to be concerned as well that we may be, one, costing ourselves reliability benefits by trying to get too efficient and too narrow on that term, but also would would this capacity really be deliverable as expected in the real time, given the topography changes, and how does that whole concern and issue factor into all this? Thanks.
Thanks, Josh, and I hear you. And I think I'm probably, with this efficiency talk, I'm probably emphasizing not the key issue here. The key issue is, as Greg mentioned, is just trying to limit the possibility of resources that have extremely high energy costs from being consistently awarded these upward capacity products, and then in the real-time market offering in and never being dispatched for energy just because they're so uneconomic. And that's really, that's sort of an efficiency thing, but that's really the problem we're trying to get at. An efficiency thing, maybe I'm overstating it a little bit.
Okay, well, let me offer.
This is Brad.
Okay.
This is Brad. I'd add that, don't read too much into when we use the word efficiency as far as this goes. We're just what we're trying to do is, on days when energy prices are in the $100 range, as an example, not award imbalance reserves to $800 resources. You want, ideally you would clear your bid stack, for energy up to the highest priced resource that it's efficient at providing you energy, and up to $100, and then you'd be awarding imbalance reserves to the next resources in the stack, the $110, the $120, the $130 resource, and not the $800 or $900 resource. That's what we're trying to achieve here.
I think the way to look at it is, if you have two resources that are offering in imbalance reserves, and we'll say they're offering it at the same capacity price, so they're offering it at $10, but we'll take Brad's example. One's offering in at a $100 energy price, and the other one's offering it at a $1,000 energy price. From a capacity basis, they're the same cost, but you're really getting a more valuable product from the one that comes with the lower energy bid, because again, these are reserves that we expect, on a high likelihood that we're going to have to dispatch them when we get to the real-time market. And so we want to make sure those are available, because those will have more value to us than the extremely high energy price bids.
Okay. Thoughts on that? First off, back to the whole congestion or deliverability issue. you could award that, say, IRU or RCU to the $100, $110 resource that had this energy bid, but if it's not available in the real-time market because of the congestion change, you've also kind of limited yourself because you removed any must-offer obligations to unawarded resources. So if the capacity, if the capacity isn't awarded in sort of in line with what ends up happening, which is going to be kind of random, since you simply won't know what your congestion topography is going to be like for the next day when you award these, it kind of worries me that in trying to pick and choose arguably let's call it a less expensive or more efficient resource from a burn perspective, it does kind of put a bit of risk because now you've removed them, or you're proposing to remove the must-offer obligation in the real time for all the other resources. The second thing is there's no reason why that resource, as Alva and others have pointed out, couldn't then come around in the real time and submit much higher values, especially if there's significant changes in cost structures. Let's say there's a spike in natural gas values. Or the one that scares me the most, especially with recent history, is we suddenly lose transmission lines. You know, it seems like right now we have, in your proposal, you're talking about this is meant to curtail operator actions that are out of market. To me, operator actions that are out of market are supposed to be, and are demonstrated to be, supporting system reliability, which is the end-all be-all when it comes to the people on the ground. If this process, though, undermines that reliability by either awarding inappropriate resources, that not inappropriate in terms of cost, but inappropriate in terms of eventual deliverability, or removes too much must-offer obligation, it just seems like this whole thing gets messy. And in terms of which one is most efficient from an energy perspective, that's actually some more a function of how you're setting up this product to begin with, or it's a bid-in product, as opposed to a shadow price established product in the real time. So if you look at FRP, that's all based off of unawarded ramping capacity that would have been converted to energy had you dispatched it, but you've instead held it back for future intervals of ramping, and that's worked really well. I mean, you look at your track record on that, and the price spikes, the infeasible solutions in your RTD have dropped considerably. That's been great. So I'm just worried that we're trying to mix and match economic concepts against a foundational societal need, and I don't know that they mix. And it might just be me not really understanding things yet, because this does feel very complicated. Thank you.
Josh? So Adam, I
I'm
do
still here.
see it. Go ahead, Brad.
Well, that
wasn't you, Brad?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
No, wasn't me.
Okay. Yeah, it looks like Alva and Seth are still in the queue. I'm not sure if you had additional questions, or you can, if you don't have questions, go ahead and select there you go, hand icon. Okay. And I don't see any comments in the chat. Great. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll move topics now to some changes that we made to the MarketPower Mitigation pricing for the capacity products. So we had feedback in our last proposal when we proposed a $30 mitigation price for imbalance reserves and reliability capacity that was based on the 90th percentile historical spin price. That $30 was perhaps too high of a price. There were also concerns about, a single mitigation price across all locations may be inappropriate. So we did include in this proposal to calculate a competitive availability price that would be calculated similar to how we calculate our competitive energy price and our energy market power mitigation. And so the capacity price would be mitigated to the greater of those two quantities, assuming the mitigated bid exceeds them. So let's see. So, you know, going back to the default availability bid, you know, we've expressed this, but we've had a difficult time trying to calculate what a default availability is for each resource. So what we've done is we've provided some data here to break down various percentiles of both historical spinning reserve bid prices and spinning reserve cleared prices to see if this may help, you know, stakeholders sort of you know, maybe we can come to a consensus about what, you know, default availability bid is appropriate for reliability capacity and imbalance reserves. And then I have this last sentence with a star next to it because it's, you know, something that we thought about in the last couple of days and didn't make it into the paper, but we can also consider a negotiated option for the standard default availability bid if it's too low for the specific resource, similar to how we do, you know, established DEBs and energy mitigation. So I'll pause there if anybody has any questions or thoughts.
Again, you want to select the hand icon above the chat window on the right, or you can press pound 2 if you're just dialed in.
All right, I am not yet seeing anyone in the verbal question queue.
Okay. I don't see any chat questions.
Let's move on. Mm-hmm. Okay. So the next topic is around variable energy resources. So through the day-ahead market enhancements, the variable energy resources will be able to elect in the master file whether or not they would intend to use the CAISO forecast as their upper economic limit in IFM. Doing so, they would become what we call a CAISO forecasted VER in IFM. So I'm actually going to start in the lower half of the slide. If a resource, if a variable energy resource does want to be considered in this way, they would be eligible for both the upward and the downward capacity products. And they also would not be subject to the cost allocation of reliability capacity up. Now, the reason why, you know, we had to sort of blend this proposal with you know, allowing variable energy resources the opportunity to provide these products with the reliability concern that we stated in our previous proposal, where if a variable energy resource was scheduling above or had an energy schedule on a combination of upward capacity awards in excess of their CAISO VER forecast, that, you know, that may not be, from the operator's perspective, a reliable solution. And so by capping their upper economic limit at the CAISO VER forecast, we can ensure that the combination of energy schedule and upward capacity awards don't exceed that CAISO VER forecast, and we're good to go. So if a resource is wants to be a non-CAISO forecasted VER, they can continue to use set their own upper economic limit based on their forecast, and then they can you know, use you know, virtual supply and demand to take a position in the day-ahead market that they want to. They would still be eligible to provide the downward products, but they would not be eligible for the upward products, and they would be subject to the cost allocation of reliability capacity up to the extent that they overschedule themselves in the IFM. I also have in starred the bottom bullet starred because it's not something that we had in our paper, but something that we have thought of in the last couple of days, is to consider a requirement to provide a high sustainable limit as part of being a forecasted VER, and this is related to the hybrid resources initiative, and so we're seeking some stakeholder feedback on whether or not that is appropriate. I don't know if Greg or Amber want to add anything related to high sustainable limit that is good context.
I don't think Amber's on at the moment.
Okay, that's fine. So then we can move on, or move on to questions or comments on this portion.
Sure. Yeah, no, we have that. I'll go back in the queue.
All right.
Adam will go.
Yeah.
Yep, Alva, your line is unmuted.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Just to follow up immediately on that, do you have any notion of how hybrids will be treated, given that the VER component is a significant part of their output in terms of being able to provide these services?
Off the top of my head, I don't know that the distinction would be, but I could follow up with you. I'm sure that I could get that answered.
Thanks. Are you saying that you think they would be treated identically, or because a hybrid could provide the high sustainable limit, but still provide a bid that is different, whereas a VER is going to automatically be limited in its PMAX to the forecast, right? I'm just trying to.
Yeah, and my hesitancy is just because I think when we conceptualize these rules, we were thinking about pure, not hybrid variable energy resources, and that maybe we need to provide some more detail and more thinking around, how since hybrid resources has evolved since the last time that we put out this proposal, that maybe there's some updates we need to make around that.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you, James.
Yep, thank you.
Alrighty, and I do not think we have any additional callers in the verbal queue at this time.
And I don't see any in the chat either. So go ahead, James.
Okay, so another point, so this is going to take up 2 slides. So another important thing we wanted to discuss is a proposed transition period for the day-ahead market enhancements. So what we would propose for a transition period, what it would look like is that RA Resources would continue to bid $0 for availability for imbalance reserves and reliability capacity, similar to how they bid 0 for REC today. RA Resources will continue to have a real-time must offer obligation consistent with their resource adequacy status that is with or without an imbalance reserve or reliability capacity award. Resources will be paid the marginal price for imbalance reserves and reliability capacity awards because those prices can be based on opportunity costs, and it would be right to pay resources that cost. In terms of when a transition period may end, it could either be at the start of the year when new EDAM entities are onboarding into the future extended day-ahead market. But we think that there's, with or without the extended day-ahead, going forward with the extended day-ahead market, there's value to, resource adequacy, efficiency, and other things that, we would eventually seek to end the transition period independent of EDAM, and would appreciate stakeholder feedback on what that appropriate length of that may be. Next slide, please. So here's a list of the things that we would, the purposes of the transition period, what we could use that time to do. One, obviously, is to sort of observe how the new market is performing, make tweaks to certain market design elements like, is P97.5 and 2.5 the appropriate imbalance reserve requirement? Maybe making tweaks to things like the default availability bids or other things as we have more opportunity to observe how they work. The transition period would provide time for load serving entities to potentially transition RA contracts away from a paradigm of non-zero RUC availability bids for resource adequacy capacity and towards a paradigm of providing availability bids for those costs in the day-ahead market. We would use this time to analyze and coordinate with resource adequacy enhancements, topics like, whether or not to continue with a real-time must-offer obligation, or whether the combination of imbalance reserves and reliability capacity is sufficient to remove the real-time MU. Things about, flex RA, whether to have a, where does flexible RA fit into this? Things related to evaluating, I mentioned default availability bid already, and other things like, evaluating how the P97.5 price strategy is working and whether adjustments need to be made to that. So that would be the purpose of the transition period. I'll take any questions or comments about that.
I don't see anybody in the queue, but we'll give it a minute. Again, you can also submit your question in the chat. Right.
This is also the end of the content for day-ahead market enhancements. So we could also use this time to take any general questions or comments about any of the topics.
Sure. You have somebody. Oh, we had somebody in the queue for a moment. Yep, there you go.
All right, I see him back. All right, caller, your line's being unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, this is Mohan Narala with CWR. Can you hear me well?
Yes, hi, Mohan.
Yes.
Oh, okay, hi. So going back to slide number 43. So the first bullet states RA resources must be $0 for imbalance reserve and reliability capacity. And I guess this is a general statement. There are some resources that cannot provide imbalance reserve. I think if you look at the Appendix A table for eligibility, there are certain resources such as participating load that can be dispatched on hourly basis is not eligible for imbalance reserve. So I guess the must offer would apply to applicable resource only.
Yeah, that's a good clarification. So yeah, it would not be all RA resources needing to bid $0. It would just be the RA resources that are eligible to be awarded imbalance reserves that have to bid $0 for the product.
Okay, so follow-up question will be, there is a certain limitations on participating load that provides RA today, and they cannot offer energy in the IFM. They can only provide non-spin bid. And if you look at the eligibility table, and the participating load is supposed to offer energy in the day-ahead market. I think that is represented by EN. So that's not how it works today. It can offer only non-spin IFM. So
Another good clarification, because in the table in the appendix, it does describe which resources are eligible to provide which products, but so in this case, I'm looking at the row, participating load with 15-minute dispatch capability could provide imbalance reserves up or down, but to the extent that they don't have, they're not a flex RA resource, they're not obligated to bid for imbalance reserves if they don't want to.
Right. So I think if we add one more column on that table that shows our master obligation in IM and RA master obligation in real time, and that will be for each of those different types of resources. It will be very clear, and we provide further comments based on that.
Okay.
I lost. Yeah. Thank you. Anybody else in the queue? Adam, just so you know, I lost the internet connection, so I can't see the screen. So you'll have to kind of take the reins on the slides, and I can still go.
Okay,
to the
no
next
big deal.
step. Yeah, but let me know if anybody's in the queue, or if you can see any questions in the chat.
I think we do not have any additional questions in the queue or the chat at this time.
Okay, so we'll go to the next step, so you can go past the title slide. I believe the next one is the EIM classification. You could just confirm that. Because the changes that we are proposing impact the broader day-ahead market, we believe that the EIM governing body has advisory role over this initiative, but we do, and this hasn't changed since the last proposal, but if you have any comments on that, we'll include that as an item in the comments template. And then if you go to the next slide, I believe that's regarding the technical appendix. Are you there?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Sorry, I can't see anything. Okay, and as far as the technical appendix, we did say that it would be, this is referenced at the very end of our proposal, that we did say that this would be posted prior to the comments, which are due on August 18th. I don't have an exact date, I do apologize, but we will try to get it, we'll make it available as soon as we have it. And if you go to the last slide, which is the schedule, I don't see the dates, I believe. So like I said, the comments are due August 18th. We'll have a comments template available for you to help guide your input. I believe, James, can you see the slides? Can you go over the remainder of the schedule?
Sure. Yeah. So we're anticipating posting a draft final proposal aiming for September 15th. That should get us just enough time to take the proposal to the EM governing body on October 20th and the CAISO Board of Governors November 3rd or 4th. And the implementation target as of right now is fall of 2022.
Thank you, James. And if you have any follow-up questions, you're welcome to send those to either me or you can send them to ISO Stakeholder Affairs, and we'll route them to the appropriate person for response. And let's just see if there are any other questions before we conclude the call today.
We do have several questions. We have a caller waiting in the queue.
Okay.
All right, Bonnie, your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, thanks. This is Bonnie Blair, Six Cities Group. There's a lot of references in the paper to deployment scenarios. Will the technical appendix talk some more about those and explain how they'll be developed and applied?
Yes, it should. This is James, and I believe if you're just interested in the deployment scenarios, they may be exactly the same as the ones that were developed in the previous technical appendix. We don't have George here today, but that may at least get you 98% of the way there. I don't think there's going to be any changes to that part of it.
Okay.
The big difference is that the technical appendix is going to lay out more of the technical structure of the RUC MarketPower Mitigation run, and that sort of thing. So those would be the big changes you would see there.
It would just help get a conceptual feel for the deployment scenarios.
Bonnie, we're having a difficult time hearing you.
It would help to get a conceptual feel for the deployment scenarios, and it sounds like previous technical appendix could help with that.
Bonnie, if you're able to move closer to your microphone or use a different device, it might be best. We're having trouble hearing you.
Okay. I'm good. I'm good. Thank you.
No problem. Feel free to put your questions in the chat as well.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, or you can reach out to me, Bonnie, also.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we do have another caller in the queue. All right, Ramon, your line's unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hey, Ramon Mitchell from Pacific Corp. I have a comment from way back in the presentation regarding the allocation of costs for the imbalance reserve product. So I noticed that the allocation of costs is based on the schedule changes between day ahead and the 50-minute market for generation, imports, exports, load. But I also note that the calculation of the imbalance reserve product, as it was laid out in the past FRP initiative, is based on load, wind, and solar only. Have you given any thought to aligning the allocation of the costs with the determination of the actual imbalance reserve awards?
This is James, and I appreciate your question. And my understanding is that you're trying to connect the way that costs are allocated for imbalance reserves to the way that we determine the imbalance reserve requirement based on load and wind and solar forecasts. Is that correct?
My general observation was that you only use load, wind, and solar schedule changes to determine the imbalance reserve awards, but you allocate the cost to imports, exports, load, and all generation schedule changes between the day ahead and the 50-minute market. And so I was curious as if you were thinking, if you put thought into expanding the imbalance reserve calculation at some point in the future to include uncertainty in exports, uncertainty, non-dispatchable generation, and so forth, to better align the allocation of the costs with the calculation of the awards that you're going to end up allocating costs on.
Yeah, I think I understand the question. I'm not from a forecast or from a requirements perspective. We're setting the upward and downward uncertainty requirement based on historical uncertainty using variables like load and the level of solar and the level of wind forecast at the time. I don't think that there is any plans to incorporate other types of schedule changes in the calculation of the requirements. Somebody could expand on that if they could.
Yeah, this is Brad. Amber, excuse me. I'm not sure if Amber's still on the line, but I think all those other, the imbalance reserve requirement is based on historical differences done through a quantile regression technique that takes into account those few factors as inputs into the quantile regression, and that's about as far as I can talk about quantile regression. But those it's based on actual differences, so those other items are implicitly in the requirement. We allocate the costs to actual performance in the market each day, because that's how we those are the cost drivers actually that day, and they're intended to provide an incentive for excuse me, a bad throat. If we didn't, then the cost allocation wouldn't incent performance.
Thank you, and that makes sense. You know, actual allocating to actual performance is sensible. And then you have on the flip side the expected performance, in a sense, which is what the imbalance reserve requirement is aiming to get at. But some of the items that are allocated, some of the items that the costs are allocated to are actually not in the calculation of the imbalance reserve requirements. My understanding is that the calculation looks only at load, wind, and solar. It doesn't look at interchange deviations, or it doesn't look at deviations on non-participating thermal generators wherein they don't follow the dispatch operating target or anything like that. So it doesn't look at certain portions of expected performance, but it allocates to all actual performance. And that was a discrepancy that at least I see in my mind when I was trying to communicate as a possible thought.
Thank you, Ramon. Any other questions?
Thanks.
Adam, do we have anybody else?
Yes, we do.
Okay, good.
Although your line is unmuted, please go ahead.
Thank you. I had 3 questions, because 2 of them I'm channeling from our team's sidebar internally. But 2 of them have to do with the schedule. One is we were hoping to see the technical appendix before starting to formulate comments. So I don't know if you can either, depending on I don't know exactly how long it's going to take you to put that together, but you may want to schedule the comments deadline in relation to that rather than this meeting, because we really want to see those details, and we're interested more generally, not just as I think Vonnie's question was a very good one, but there's sort of just getting more of the details on the formulation is important to us. A second question is more of a general question. This is not mine, but it was the questioning whether we should wait until the implementation of the flexible ramping product enhancement, which I think is now the spring, and determining the effectiveness of that before setting the DAME implementation date. And I think there is some concern that we make sure that all of the stuff that's in the pipe, that we've seen the benefits, and we still see a need for this very major change. I tend to think it's necessary, but I think the point is still a good one, that it may be that knowing that if all of our problems were solved in that simple change in real time by making all of the flexible ramping product deliverable, maybe this would decrease the priority of this. And then the third question is whether, and this I wasn't paying attention to the slide, but the question is whether the allocation of the imbalance reserve requirements will be like the FRP, and then in having a nodal component. For deliverability, I'm assuming that's the point.
Yeah. Yeah, this is Brad Alva. We certainly, our current plan is to implement this in the fall after the flexible ramping product, nodal flexible ramping product implementation in the spring. And besides just managing bandwidth and implementation bandwidth, the intent of that is to be able to see how the nodal FRP is working before we put in the nodal IRP, since the nodal IRP could be affects the day-ahead market, which is a bigger effect than the real-time market. I think I think we think that these day-ahead market enhancements aren't the need for that is not going to go away with the normal flexible ramping product, because the intent of this is to get the capacity committed as a balance reserves in the day-ahead time frame available, so that capacity will be there to be able to convert that to flexible ramping product in the real time. I forgot your last. I think you had 3 points.
Oh, the last was just on the technical appendix, but thank you. Those are good answers.
Yeah, and the technical appendix, that's a good point. And right now we still need to determine that date that we can get that out. George that's been writing that has been on vacation, and then he had something come up, and so that's why we're kind of waffling on the date. But if that isn't going to be out real soon, I think that's reasonable to extend the comments date.
Great, thank you, Brad. Appreciate it.
So James, I am able to see, and I did. There was a question from Steve Kearns. Will there be a workshop and another round of comments after the draft final proposal is posted? And he's from PGP.
Yeah, there will be another stakeholder call similar to this after the draft final proposal is posted. Presumably about a week after the proposal is posted.
Yep. And Bonnie and Alva, they were in the queue from before, Adam. I can see my screen now.
That is correct.
Okay. Yeah, I don't see any other questions in the chat.
I do not think we have any additional questions. Thank you.
Okay, and just, so we did have a call scheduled tomorrow morning for this. And so we're going to go ahead and cancel that because we covered everything today. But if you do have any follow-up questions, again, feel free to reach out to me or the ISO Stakeholder Affairs mailbox, and we'll be happy to get responses to those questions. So thank you all for joining us today. Greatly appreciate all the feedback. Please include those in your written comments, which are due on the 18th, and we'll get a comment template out there for you soon. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our call. Thank you for using Event Services, and you may now disconnect.